Leave them. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's meeting of the Communities Housing and Environment Committee. A little bit of housekeeping before we start. We're not expecting the fire alarm to sound tonight, but if it does, please remain seated, and Mrs Matthews, sitting to my right, will assess the situation and ascertain the best route for evacuation. The Council will be webcasting the meeting tonight, although I'm told that there may be a few problems with it. However, I would ask if anyone else is intending to record the proceedings. I ask this not to stop you, but merely to ensure that other people in the room are aware of it. Okay, item 1 on the agenda, apologies for absence.
We've received apologies from Councillor Perry and Councillor Webster.
Thank you. Item 2, notification of substitute members. Oops.
Councillor Springett for Councillor Webster.
Thank you, Councillor Springett. Urgent items. There are no urgent items tonight. Item 4, notification of any visiting members. There are none. Item 5, disclosures by members and officers. Are there any? No, thank you. Item 6, any disclosures of lobbying? No, thank you. Item 7, to consider whether any item should be taken in private because of the possible disclosure of exempt information. We have none. No. Thank you. Item 8, minutes of the meeting held on the 18th of July. As usual, I'll go through these page by page. Page 1. 2. 3. 4. 5. No. Happy to state these are a true record and I'll sign this accordingly. Thank you. Item 9, presentation of petitions. There are none. Item 10, question and answer session for members of the public, if any. There are none. Item 11, committee work programme. Any questions on the work programme? Councillor Joy.
Only to say it looks like we're going to be busy.
What, this year you mean? Okay. Well, we have got some other items probably to come on, but this is what we've got as we stand at the moment. Any other questions on the work programme? No? Okay, thank you. Item 12, we should have a local healthcare oral update from Councillor Gooch. She's on her way, so if the committee have no objection, I'm going to leave that until she arrives and go on to item 13. Is that okay with everyone? Thank you. So item 13, key performance indicator update, quarter 1, 2017-18. Alex.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'm here to introduce the first quarter key performance indicator report. So this covers the period April to June, with the quarter 2 report due in November, obviously because the committee for last month was cancelled, so that's why there's been a slight delay. So performance for quarter 1 was slightly mixed. So we saw 4 indicators achieving their target and 3 indicators missing the target by more than 10%. Performance improved for 3 of the indicators and it also declined for 3 of the indicators. So like I said, it's a slight mix there. Information on rating and direction can be found at Appendix 1 if you want it broken down by specific indicator. So some positive outcomes for quarter 1. include the achievement of the recycling target, and that's kind of the first time that's been achieved in sort of the last two or 3 years, I believe it is. So that's obviously shows the hard work that's been delivered by the service. This service also achieved the target for responding to fly tips as well. And in terms of the housing service, homeless preventions have continued to perform well against their target, with 133% preventions taking place in the first quarter. They've also improved on previous quarters and years. We've also seen a steady decrease in the number of families in temporary accommodation, despite a 59% increase in homelessness applications. So I think it would be quite important to kind of recognise the good performance that's going on there as well. In terms of some slightly less positive stories that we've noticed, the number of affordable home completions for Q1 did miss its target, and I understand this is due to some slippage on sites and in terms of contractor handover delays. We do expect the target to be achieved though, and the remaining quarters should make up for the shortfall that was seen in the first quarter. Similarly, households housed through the housing register failed to achieve its target, and that's due to a similar reason. There's a lower number of properties that had become available, less provided by registered providers. I'm happy to take any questions on this report or this item, but that's it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Alex. Councillor Ring.
How quickly, I know this is over a certain amount of time, quarterly, etc., but I am really getting concerned about where are these houses that are supposed to be being built for people on the register, because they all seem to be disappearing, and isn't that what we've got social landlords for, including ourselves? And I don't think we can afford to keep going every quarter waiting to find out where these poor people have got a home, because we've got a responsibility and we're falling behind on the most important things that we do as a council. So I'm really, really worried about that, because I think it's giving out the very bad message.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Ring. Obviously, this is just the Q1 performance, and most of the affordable homes that will be delivered in the borough are going to come through private sector-led sites sort of allocated within the local plan, which will have a percentage designated for affordable housing. Typically, the house builders have their financial year end at 31st of December or 31st of March, and they do tend to sort of ramp up delivery towards those dates. So I think what we're seeing here is not anything to be overly concerned about. And when we look at the numbers from the sort of other end of the spectrum, what we're seeing is large amounts of houses on site. We've looked at all this stuff in the Strategic Planning Committee, and we're on course to sort of hit our housing numbers. So I do feel very assured that the affordable housing will flow through over the course of this year. Obviously, we all sort of share the concern as to the affordability of the actual affordable housing that comes out of the process as well, and that being suitable for those in the most acute housing need. And it's a topic that myself and the chair have sort of been working on, and we're sort of working on a proposal that will come to the Policy and Resources Committee in November and back to this committee to see what more the council can do to sort of take more of a proactive approach to the delivery of affordable housing. So there's a bit of context for you.
That's good to hear, but it isn't helping the people that are waiting for a home.
Just a little more to say on the topic as well. In December, we'll be bringing back a report to this committee, a review of our temporary accommodation strategy that we launched 12 months ago. And that is going to sort of set out some further steps that we would like to take to alleviate, the most acute pressures around homelessness. So we're going to be more likely than not proposing the acquisition of further properties for temporary accommodation. We've bought quite a few this year already, but more accommodation to be purchased by the council for temporary accommodation, and also coming up with strategies where we can deliver products that are going to be most helpful to those in the most acute need, that are kind of a little bit, for want of a better term, log-jammed in the temporary accommodation at the moment. So we're sort of working on it on all fronts.
Okay. Councillor Mortimer.
Thank you. The best thing for me in this item is actually 4.8, where we've got 133 preventions from becoming homeless, and I think that's very important, and I hope that's it sounds back to the front, but I hope it's a positive trend, if I can put it that way. But I think that's really good. And can I just ask regarding the recycling data, although we're up and everything, I understand, I think it was a couple of meetings back, but there was a delay getting data from KCC. Are we getting that now, or is there still an issue?
We do get the data. The issue is obviously purely that it comes from a contractor to KCC, has to be checked, has to be audited, and then comes to us. So the turnaround is tight, obviously for this performance data, but at the moment, I think for Q2, we're still missing the last month of that. So whether in time for Q2's results we'll have the full amount of data, hence we're always slightly behind on the recycling data. But we always try and present what we have, so even if you don't get a full quarter, you'll get a picture of where we're at for that, the first couple of months of it. So it's certainly, the data we have so far for this next quarter is showing the continued positive trends. So.
Any other questions on this report? Councillor Springett.
It's just something I have raised in the past as to, has anybody worked out the balance between the charging fee for the use of the recycling for commercial waste versus the cost of clearing up the fly tip? Because I have raised this before, in that if we actually reduce the fee for commercial waste, theoretically it should reduce the fly tipping. I wonder whether that has been looked at. And there's still quite a lot of 131, well, it says reports of litter, and it's great that 88.8% of fly tips are cleared, but are we trying to look at ways of reducing those fly tips by encouraging legitimate use of tips?
It was certainly part of the reason we set up our own commercial waste service, so we could offer an affordable service for the small businesses that were particularly struggling. Unfortunately, a lot of our costs are ones we're not in control of, so we still have to use a disposal site, we still have to take it to Allington Energy from Waste Facility, which has a gate fee, which we cannot change. And we have to be competitive, we have to look at it, make sure we're covering all of our costs, and the commercial waste doesn't generate huge surplus. It covers its costs and contributes a small contribution to the council's overheads. We do work with Kent County Council to look at the provision of commercial waste facilities. Obviously, we're aware there isn't one in Maidstone, and we are pushing KCC to look at that, because obviously if there is somewhere locally that people can take their waste, commercial businesses, then the chance of them hopefully dumping in a lane will be far reduced. I think the problem is what we're seeing with fly tipping is it is from the people who offer ridiculously low prices for the collection of waste from people via Facebook or other social media. We're never going to be able to compete with those prices, because the fact is they haven't got disposal costs, so they're always going to be cheaper than us, and we just have to make sure we're catching them.
Just coming back on that, is there any way we can lobby Parliament to change the law that you actually have to be licensed to pick up waste? I mean, I know you're probably supposed to be, but we've all seen the little adverts in the local paper, waste cleared. But if they had to have a licence and they could be challenged to produce a licence, I wonder whether there's anything happening on that front.
They do have to have a licence, so they have to be heavily licensed. And actually we are working, so we have an operation going, we had one with the police a couple of weeks ago, and we've got another one, I won't say exactly when, but in the near future, where we will stop any vehicles that are carrying waste on them, and we will then ask to see their paperwork. If they haven't got that paperwork and their duty of care and their waste transfer notes, we will basically give them a fixed penalty notice of £300 or consider prosecution, depending on sort of the past history that, you know, and if they've been found guilty of any offences in the past.
I have next Councillor Burton.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, continuing on with that theme of licensed and unlicensed people who take waste, perhaps there's also another measure that we could look at in terms of a campaign to encourage people or discourage people from using unlicensed waste. Okay.
We have hashtag Your Waste, Your Responsibility, which will be coming out. So a lot of work around making sure both businesses and homeowners, you know, are aware that they have an obligation to ensure that their waste is dealt with appropriately and that they check the licences and the details of the people taking their waste. So yes, look out for it coming soon.
Having said that, I know I actually do remember we did discuss it here before, so yeah, ignore me.
Councillor Webb.
Thank you. On the fly tipping, we've got, obviously, we're above target on the 88% there, but the trend is sort of downwards. Now, it sort of says in the report that they're changing to the waste crime team. Is that sort of why the trend is downwards at the moment, or, you know, is it that sort of the reason?
Basically, the waste crime team were created at the beginning of July, so this quarter was actually sort of at the time the changes were going through. So there was some work carried out in that first quarter, but very little. Without sort of giving the game away for quarter two, the figure is in the region of 60% compared to obviously the 10% that we've got there, so well above target. So I think there'll be a much better story next time.
Any other questions on this report? Okay, members, we're asked to note the performance for quarter one on this report. Can I take it that it's duly noted by everyone? Thank you. I'll now go back to item 12. Welcome, Councillor Gooch. We did know you was running late, so we'll now go on to item 12, local health care oral update. Councillor Gooch.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Thank you, members. Thank you, Councillor Mortimer, for receiving my panic message to you to say that I was running very late. Members, just a few minutes just to make you aware, if you're not already, that the leader, in her wisdom, has delegated to me as the deputy leader to be the health champion. And you think, what on earth does that mean? It means representing the Borough Council on the Kent Health and Wellbeing Board. Now, you may know that the public health, the responsibility for public health, transferred to county councils when the primary care trusts became CCGs. I hope you're keeping up, because this is really far too complicated for even me to understand. But what I do understand is that in Kent County Council taking on the role of public health, it commissioned its district councils, that is to say, Maidstone Borough Council in our case, to carry out prevention, a lot of healthy frameworks and all sorts of things. And in fact, you'll find that it's part of our strategy. It's one of our strategic objections to have a healthy borough. On that work, Health and Wellbeing Board, I certainly try to promote and support the work that Maidstone Borough Council does. At the moment, things are at a bit of a crossroads with the Health and Wellbeing Board, because Kent are planning to align it with Medway so that it becomes the Kent and Medway Health and Wellbeing Board. That will enable it to align with the Kent and Medway CCG. Now, the important role that we can play is not just in health and well-being initiatives that our officer, Paul Clark, is expert at arranging with local surgeries and whatever, but I hope you all enjoyed the presentation that Bob Bowes from the West Kent CCG gave us the other day. I think you were all sent his presentation. Now, actually, our borough, along with other districts maybe, can impact hugely on what the work of the Sustainability and Transportation Plan is all about, which is trying to change the way that health is delivered to our residents. With financial pressures, as you probably know from his presentation, you can't just have hospitals and doctors anymore. Something's got to change. The work of the hospitals has got to be for sick people. Hopefully we can have somewhere called hubs. Not a good word, but I like to think of it more as a cottage hospital kind of approach, as well as your doctor's surgeries. The role that we can play as a borough is to influence those sustainability plans by providing data, by providing all sorts of information about population statistics and spatial planning. And of course, bear in mind, our borough council, through its planning, its parks, is really responsible for an awful lot of health. But anyway, I just wanted to let you know that that's, bless you, that's what I'm up to, and that's what I try to do. There are plenty more experts out there than myself. It's just that I am the person that puts my hand up and says, hey chaps, it's been delegated to me, I'm the health champion, and I just needed to let you know as the right committee, you have the responsibilities, obviously, and I think it's right and proper that you should know that I am here doing what I'm doing. I hope to make reports to you at some point in the future. As you also know, the leader has also bestowed on me being the champion for the police as well. So, and I think I've come here before to talk about that. I won't waste your time any further or take your time any further, but I feel a lot better now that I've said to you, hello members, here I am, and I hope to fly the flag for Maidstone on the Health and Wellbeing Board and on the Sustainability and Transformation Plan that the clinical commissioning groups are going through at the moment. Thank you very much for your time, and I hope I haven't disrupted the meeting too much. Thank you so much, Chairman. Thank you to the Chairman. He's been a great support.
You may, of course.
Can I just ask, these changes, I mean, we keep hearing different changes. Is there any time scales? Do they give you any idea, or is it just something that's going to go on, and then when it happens, or do we actually know?
I wouldn't be brave enough to stick my neck out and say, yes, it's going to happen next week. But the sustainability and transportation, those plans are going to be transformation plans, have a timescale of between 4 and 5 years. And I think we're already a couple of years into that. Now, bear in mind, there's an awful lot of work going on at the moment, a huge amount of work going on between all the different boards and partnerships and goodness knows what else. So it will be a while before we hear anything. But I have to say that we as a borough have been knocking on the door for a long time to say to these people, here we are, we can help, we can influence, and they are beginning to listen. And meetings are going on.
Councillor Burton.
Along a similar line of questioning, do you find that the constant shifting of goalposts, whether it be becoming a part of the Kent and Medway, this, that and the other and so on, makes it challenging, to say the least, to actually deliver on these frontline services that people need?
What a very apt question. I have just come from the West Kent Health and Wellbeing Board, and myself and other people there, the other people there being representatives from doctors, nurses, healthcare workers, all sorts of people, they were almost saying similar things. There are so many different boards and groups and what have you. It makes it... And there are a lot of strategies up here as well, and it's all very nice and all very pretty. But how do we make things happen on the ground? I think that's a very, very apt question. And it's one that not only me, I'm asking, but a lot of other people are asking as well. Because at the end of the day, it's what our residents need, and that is the bottom line.
Councillor Ring.
Councillor Gooch, I love you for your personality and how you take these roles on with a big smile on your face, and you sit at these committees and you really try to believe what they're actually saying. I'm an old hat now, so I don't do that anymore. I was reading statistics the other day, and the same statistics that you, I hope, are taking as a member of Maidstone Borough Council, because I have to get selfish on these sort of things. I really don't care what's happening with Medmay. I want to know what's happening for our residents on the ground. So I would like to see a few questions asked here, because we are still a lower life in the areas of Shetway, Parkwood, Fant. Now that was the same position 15 years ago when I became a councillor. So forgive me if I'm not taking it too exciting about what these people are supposed to be putting together. And if you've just come from a meeting with nurses, etc., and they don't know how to help people on the ground, I think we're in big trouble.
Can I come back on that? The people at the West Kent Board represented different areas. So, for example, there was somebody there from Sevenoaks who was a health and social care worker. And she was describing the successes she was having by being, if you like, a one-stop shop for signposting. So there is good work, but it's patchy. And I take your point totally. It's what happens in Maidstone that counts. And the issue about, for example, shortage of doctors, I know that that's been brought to my attention. But this is the kind of thing that the plan is trying to turn around. And this is how we as a borough are trying to influence where these cottage hospitals go. I'm calling them cottage hospitals, that's my terminology. They are called hubs, because we need to influence. It's no good sticking a hub in the middle of a field out in the countryside somewhere where it's not accessible for people who need it. So that is how I hope that we can strongly influence that. It's a long road that's being trodden, but I take your point. I don't quite share your cynicism. I understand it, but I just feel so strongly that we need to be positive if we're going to achieve any kind of influence. And I make no apologies for the fact that I do get a bit over-emotional, as indeed I know you do. And in fact, we all do, I suppose.
Okay. Councillor Mortimer.
Just one thing while you're here, Faye. Could you just keep an eye out on privatisation for us, please? Because I think that possibly further down the route, when you talk about hubs, they might start looking for sponsorship. And I don't personally want to see anything with Virgin Healthcare, Maidstone, etc. on that. And I think it could be a good excuse to move that way.
Forgive me, I'm just making a note of that. I think the how of it happens, never mind what happens, is one of the question marks. But again, I take your point, because at the end of the day, I am still on those boards giving the view of Maidstone Borough Council, and that's why I welcome your views. Thank you very much. And indeed, that's why I just was so eager to just come here and say, this is what I do, okay, and to receive your views. Thank you, members.
Councillor Burton.
Sorry to come back, Faye, but while you're taking back messages, could you tell him I'd like to know where the other 4 hubs have gone to? Oh, cottage hospitals, or whatever you call them, because last year we were going to be offered 4 to 5 hubs in the borough of Maidstone, and now, after the talk the other night by Dr. whatever his name is, and I'm sorry, that was the worst presentation I'd ever seen, so that made me feel more depressed, that we've lost some of these hubs. We're not getting so many now, and we don't understand. I don't understand who changed their mind. So could you tell them that we need more than 1. 3 was mentioned, but if you don't ask, you won't get. Thank you.
May I just respond to that, Chairman, just by saying no final decisions have been made at all. They're still working on where these hubs are going. But, having said that, I'll certainly try and find out if indeed that's what you heard and there was something. I'll certainly come back to you on that outside of the meeting, if that's okay. But give me a few days, can you?
Councillor Burton.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll start off by saying something I probably should have said the first time round, which is thank you for coming and giving us this update tonight, Councillor Gooch. I do wonder whether, rather than it just being a forum for us to sit here and have a grumble and it go nowhere, whether it might be an idea if we actually submit some sort of written response to the appropriate authority to try and summarise some of these things that we're coming up against here, because there are some common themes to what we're saying. So the concerns over the shifting organisational goalposts and plan goalposts, the apparent lack of delivery on those plans, and the fact that we don't seem to have any true idea of timescales. So when we on the front line are talking to our residents and trying to explain to them why they've got to register at the surgery over in Larkfield, we've got nothing to tell them. And I think maybe our sort of reciprocal part of this exercise could be to actually give you some of that in writing to take and to bolster the argument from Maidstone Borough Council. Don't know how the rest of the committee feel about that.
Yeah, quite happy with that.
I think it's a brilliant idea.
So, did you want to come back on that?
He didn't do it.
May I also say that because I've been so busy going to all these meetings, I haven't been very hot on feedback. And I am trying to get myself to the stage where I can just do a briefing, and I mean a short briefing, to, we have the strategic leaders meeting, which is a sort of a sounding board where you've got the group leaders together with the chief exec. By giving group leaders the briefing, the group leaders can in turn share it with their groups. That's one thing. But also, the most important thing was for me to give a briefing to your good selves, and I haven't done it, which is why I'm verbally doing it pretty damn quick now. I certainly take your point, but I would ask you to please bear in mind, nothing has been decided. And work is still going on. And you are actually describing the very problems that we've got, that the CCGs are trying to, or this transformation plan is trying to deal with, because we shouldn't have these inequalities. Maidstone feels very strongly about the inequalities in the areas you've mentioned, and across, wherever those inequalities are, we've got to try and find a way through that. We don't have the answers yet. Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah. I totally understand what you're saying, Faye, and we're not. I don't think if we were to put something together summarise our views at this committee, it wouldn't necessarily be to say we're demanding all of the answers in 30 seconds' time, but there are concerns, I think, that we have, just listening to some of the comments around the room, about why some of those answers aren't so forthcoming. So the seeming constant changing of the organisational structures and the, you know, I know plans develop naturally over time, but bearing in mind as well, we've only just very recently, as a council, as a group of, as a collective of members, had a workshop on this very subject, and I felt far more enlightened about what was going on then. But there were still certain things that I think we've all expressed here that we found quite concerning. So that's what I was trying to get at, rather than saying, oh, you know, just slamming our fists on the table for the sake of it, if you like.
Yeah, just on this topic, it's probably worth recalling that I do believe we did respond on the consultation, didn't we, to the overall direction of travel. So Paul Clark did present a report on that, and so we did input. But I guess where you want to go next is sort of holding them to account on the delivery side of implementation.
Councillor Burton, I'm not sure where you wanted to go with your proposal.
Well, I take what Mr. Cornwall is saying, that we have written a response to a particular plan. My point was more about you know, Faye's come to Councillor Gooch has come to give us an update this evening, and actually, you know, to add to the usefulness of that, perhaps we could write something in support of her when she next goes and attends the board, to say these are the views that have been collected here, you know, ongoing updates rather than just a response to a consultation. I don't know how the committee feels about that, and I suppose the most logical way forward of doing that is probably chair and vice chair to draft something. Yeah.
Okay, you're happy to leave it like that then, and we'll take that forward. Is that okay?
I think on the basis of the fact that we've got minutes and we've got the webcast, and we've got an idea of what the committee's saying, I'm more than happy with that. If
you don't want to vote on this, Councillor Batten, no? It's just something, no? Okay, fine. Anything else for Councillor Gooch? Sorry.
Yeah, Councillor Robertson. Councillor Gooch, can you tell me if this Health and Wellbeing Board is addressing the shortage of residential care beds at all? Does that come under its remit?
That does come under a separate remit, and the Health and Wellbeing Board is primarily concerned with public health kind of issues, which is the remit of the County Council who's running the Health and Wellbeing Board. All right, but if you did have a general query anyway, I'd be happy to take anything out of the meeting.
Okay, Councillor Robinson. Yeah. Any other questions? No? Well, thank you very much, Councillor Gooch, for coming along tonight and putting that across to us. I hope it wasn't a wasted journey for you.
Never.
Okay, item 14 on the agenda, first quarter budget monitoring. Ellie.
Thank you. So this is the first quarter budget monitoring report, which shows the financial position for this committee for the first 3 months of 2017-18. In terms of the headline message, we were forecasting an overall overspend for the year of £300,000. Although it's worth bearing in mind this was the position as at the end of June. Given that we're now in October, we've seen some developments and things which have moved on in some areas since the report was written. And we'll be bringing our second quarter monitoring report back to the meeting next month. So the report, hopefully the format's familiar to you, there's a breakdown in Appendix 1 which shows the budget and spend to date in each of the areas that sit within this committee. And we've given some detailed information for the areas where we're expecting a variance to exceed 30,000. That's two areas in this report. The first one is the homelessness temporary accommodation. We had forecast an overspend of 200,000 for the year, and that was due to an increase in demand for the service. That was a prudent estimate that we gave at the time, and we're hoping that it will be possible to reduce that by the end of the year. We've seen an increase in the number of households in TA, an increase in demand for that service, but a positive message we've seen more recently is the actual number of nights they're spending in that accommodation has reduced, and we'd hope that to correspond to less of a cost burden to the council. The second area that we've highlighted is street cleansing, where we had forecast an overspend of 100,000 for the year. There was a kind of variety of different issues leading to that. We're also considering that to be quite a prudent estimate, and obviously officers are working to reduce that or keep that to a minimum over the rest of the year. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Any questions? Councillor Ring.
I can understand the street cleansing costs and the recycling collections because sometimes those sort of things are completely out of our hands. And it's got here increased overtime agency costs and staff sickness. I just want to say, we sit here time and time again saying that the street ain't being cleaned, that rubbish ain't being picked up, this ain't being done. Can I please ask, as a collective councillor sitting on this committee, we stop trying to cut the budget at the depot? Because it isn't fair on anybody trying to keep us happy and our residents happy to keep streets clean if you're going to keep cutting it down. So this overspend, I don't class it as an overspend because it's the sort of situation that you're in at the time. If the councillors ring up and say we want this cleaned, it has to be cleaned. And the same with our residents. So I would like to see that sort of sorted and no more cutbacks. Because we can't row in one hand that we're not getting the jobs done and then cutting in the next. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Corn.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Ring. Do sort of share your sentiments. You know, it's obviously very difficult to continue to deliver the service because, you know, most of the expenditure does go on staffing, so any cuts have a direct effect, and sort of been working through this with my colleague Jennifer Shepherd and Mark Green, and in terms of trying to sort of improve the situation going forward, we're going to do as much as we possibly can in terms of the commercial initiatives within the department, in terms of providing grounds maintenance services to private sector clients and also the commercial waste service as well. And we're going to do our utmost to sort of grow that business from now onwards, and hopefully that can be a way of sort of delivering the overall net benefit without sort of touching the service.
Councillor Joy.
Thank you. I'm speaking on exactly the same item as Councillor Ring. Again, it's in here. I don't disagree with what you're saying, but I've just got to the stage now where I'm thinking, if we know we're having to pay premium rates for shift work to do it, whether it's the councillors that are ringing up or something happens and they need to be called out, I just think we've either got to employ more people to get the job done properly. I'm not saying we should take any jobs away, but if we're saying time and time again in any papers that I'm reading that people are off sick and we're having to spend money, agency rates for anything I think it needs looking at a bit more than just saying, well, this time we're 100 there or whatever over. So, yeah, I'm of exactly the same with this one item on 2.6.
John.
Thank you. Yes, just to... you're absolutely right, Councillor Joy. We are making changes. Provisionally, we have some figures that the figure is better for the second quarter, and we're working hard towards that. Some of our working methods, such as working nights to clean high-speed roads, we probably will not undertake next year. We work in the daytime of our current workforce, and I think we're in a position now that we can actually almost plan that a level of overtime is needed to deal with staff sickness, because obviously we're quite a big department, and you know, outside work we do have some long-term sicks, and we will factor that into next year's budget. Of course, the rabbit's out of the hat now, so we're just trying to force it back in. But yeah, we take on board what you've said: stronger, clearer working patterns, and less reliant on overtime and agencies. Obviously, it's what we want. We want to keep everything in-house. It's something we pride ourselves at the depot. And of course, you know, we will try to work with KCC greater as well. Try to piggyback on their road closures and their works as well. So I think hopefully the message has come back. We've identified, obviously the monies have been lost. We are trying to gain it back, but for next year's we have got many plans afoot to make sure that we're not back in this position again.
Thank you. I look forward to next year then.
I have Councillor Springett next.
Yeah, I think I'm on that box as well. It just concerns me slightly that with a loss of 100,000, that it's mentioning overtime and agency costs exacerbated by premium rates for shift work to cover staff sickness. That should be a small enough figure that it doesn't actually flag up within that £100,000 loss. So it must be a fair old figure to actually flag up to be worth mentioning. So I find that a bit concerning. Do we monitor sickness of individuals? Do we offer a reasonable overtime rate to those employees who are currently employed that might welcome the opportunity to opt to earn a little bit more money? So it's just, I know in the private sector, not in this area, but in the private sector, sickness rates are really seriously monitored with penalties. So I just wonder whether we do that at all.
Of course, we have to work with our HR policies, and they are different to what private sectors are. We do offer, 2 years ago we did implement a programme of work that if everything worked perfectly, no overtime would ever be needed ever again, but it doesn't work like that. When we have staff who are scheduled to work weekends and they are long-term sick, we do have to cover that, and as you said, with a premium, because we are not asking them for their goodwill, because we're paying them for them. But please be assured our wages are in line with national averages. And the guys who do weekend work, over a 5/7 shift pattern, they do get a 12% shift enhancement, which is again pretty close to the national wages.
Councillor Ring.
Sorry, I just wanted to say it's no criticism that you've spent the money, because I do truly believe you wouldn't have done it if you hadn't have needed it. What I'm saying is, if you need more staff, or we need more time, or we need overtime, that is human nature of the role that it is. I know that very well because I worked in it for 30 years, so I know. So all I'm saying is it's not criticism that you spent it, it's we need to be realistic in case you do need it.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely not taken as a criticism at all, Councillor Wren. I know you've been a great advocate of ours, but you're right. The litter still gets dropped from the high-speed roads, and the large fly tips do get dropped, and it does. Please be rest assured. Our workforce are stretched. We're speaking. I was fortunate enough to visit London on Tuesday and speaking to my people similar to me. I don't think Mason's generally got anything to worry about our cleansing standards whatsoever. I know we'll always get, I've never seen a sweeper, this road is clean, but, please be rest assured our workforce are productive, and even though this isn't, we're over budget at the moment, we're going to do everything in our power for the rest of this year, and we will put the factors in for the following year to make sure we're not back in this position again.
Councillor Burton.
Thank you, Chairman. Now, I'm not entirely sure whether I'm just being particularly astute in my reading of this spreadsheet or whether I've missed the point here. I've actually spotted a £31,000 variance that hasn't got a bit of an explanation with it, and it's on the food and safety section line. I'm just wondering whether somebody could enlighten us on that. Third of the way down, page 23, roughly, if that helps.
Okay.
That's a very good point. It's one I'm afraid I'm going to have to come back to the committee separately on, because off the top of my head, I'm not sure what that relates to.
This is why I raise it, because although it's a positive variance and the natural reaction isn't to go, oh no, we're not spending money, but it is to be able to actually review that, and to, when we come to budget making, go, well, let's put it into some of our services that need it. So yeah, it would be good if we could get an answer back on that.
Okay, mate, I'll be happy to get an answer to that by email outside of the meeting. Yep. Okay, thank you. Any other questions, members? No. Okay. The committee is asked to note this report, and can I ask then that, taking into account the questions we've asked, that it's duly noted? Thank you. Item 15. Who's taking this, Jim? Item 15, future enforcement options. Jennifer Shepherd.
Thank you. This report obviously covers the plans now. As you're aware, the contract with Kingdom ended in August this year. I think we sort of notified the committee of that ending contract, and that we would be looking at reviewing the options that were available to us for taking the service forward. That has happened, and we've actually identified some wider objectives required to deal with a number of issues relating to environmental crime, obviously of which littering is one of those, along with antisocial behaviour. I will at this point ask my colleague, Mr Roberts, if he wanted to add anything in particular about some of the issues that we've noted regarding antisocial behaviour and the new PSPO, so he can provide some background regarding the objectives that we've set ourselves and the options that we've identified.
Thank you, Mr Shepherd. I think the first thing I'd like to say actually is that dropping litter is antisocial. It is a behaviour type that the Kingdom contract sought to address, not just around making sure that the street scene in the town centre was clean and tidy. I think over the last few years we've seen a change in the behaviours affecting the town centre. The Public Spaces Protection Order that was brought in at the start of September was a measure to try and address some of those behaviours. I think the opportunity before us now, looking at an alternative service to Kingdom, is to include a range of other types of behaviour that we would seek to address through an on-street enforcement presence. I think the result of that work would probably be different to Kingdom's. It isn't around issuing tickets all of the time, and actually it's around challenging that behaviour where it's appropriate. Certainly with the Public Spaces Protection Order that we've brought in, we found that the warning and informing that we've done over the last sort of 2 weeks in the beginning of the PSPO coming into effect has actually had a significant impact. We wouldn't necessarily look to issue fixed penalty notices right off the bat if we see somebody breaching the order. It's about telling them that the behaviour that they're exhibiting is perhaps in breach of such an order, and offer words of advice to try and engage with them on that instance. The other thing I think it's worth mentioning is that the Town Marshal's project that One Maidstone has had in the town centre has had a positive impact in terms of a visible presence within the town. And I think a replacement service for Kingdom could have a similar positive impact.
Thank you. So obviously, included in the report are the wider objectives that we've looked to sort of tackle, as Mr Roberts has said, around the PSPO, addressing antisocial behaviour, but not forgetting, obviously, environmental crimes that, as I said, littering is one, but fly tipping, commercial waste, fly posting, dog fouling, all of those type of issues and concerns. And it's not limited, obviously these issues are not limited to the town centre, they are borough-wide, and so it's important that we looked at objectives that were borough-wide, and obviously we're aware that the Kingdom contract focused on littering was predominantly town centre based. So following that, we identified 5 options that we could look at replacing the service with. Obviously there was do nothing, you know, the service ended in August, and whilst we have a number of our own authorised officers that can tackle littering, there hasn't been that visible daily presence on the streets. We also looked at potentially we could re-tender the litter enforcement contract. However, at the time that contract ended, the decision was made based on the fact that we know there are wider issues we want to tackle, and that littering alone, you know, is not our sole concern. So those 2 options were pretty much eliminated fairly early on. I mean, if we want to discuss them through questions, I can, but we've eliminated those as feasible options. So that left us with 3, introducing an in-house on-street enforcement team, letting a contract for an on-street enforcement team, or working in partnership with a neighbouring authority to deliver an on-street enforcement team. The first of those, the in-house service, the focus of this would be, as opposed to a financially driven service, it would look at being behaviour, you know, changing behaviour, outcome-led, and really focus on delivering those objectives that we've set out. However, it isn't without cost, it isn't without risk, and it's important that I sort of flag that tonight. The proposal for an in-house enforcement team would be around 2 members of staff that split their time sort of 70% for littering and 30% for the other antisocial and environmental issues, with some targets for achieving income through FPNs, but not as a driving the service forward, purely to support our ability to offer those wider services. Within that, as you'll see within the report, the actual sort of targets are sort of, you know, issuing potentially 3 tickets a day over a small, you know, over sort of 5.5 hours in a day spent tackling litter. That's not performance-led. That is, you know, what we think is actually tackling the littering issue that potentially is out there. That option has indicated that it potentially would be a cost to the council of around just short of £12,000, sorry, just over £11,000. However, there are legal costs with that. In the report, it's estimated that it could be in the region of £50,000. However, those costs are reclaimed through the courts. It's a slow process, and not all costs would be recovered. So I just wanted to flag that up, that it's a potential in any one year there could be sort of costs that would sit there without any income. The other option was obviously outsourcing the service. Again, that would be a slightly, from our estimations and talking to providers out there, it looks that it could be, you know, slightly cheaper for the council to go that route. It would be a less risky option, because obviously it would be along the same sort of lines as the Kingdom contract. However, there are more reputational risks, I think it's important to say, and the fact that the control and the fact that it would still be an element would be financially driven based on this approach. So again, it's not without concerns. The last option was about partnerships. Now, this is a very real option, but probably not right now. It would be important for us to get a service up and running. Mr Roberts has already mentioned the one Maidstone's Marshals that they've had, and it's possible that such a proposal could come out of the bid that the town centre, they're looking at in the town centre. There would be no reason that we couldn't then provide that service for them and actually have the funding brought in from the bid for us to do that. That's a discussion that will happen, you know, once, you know, if the bid is approved, goes through, in sort of, you're looking towards the end of 2018. Again, our neighbouring authorities, most are within contracts at the moment. Our neighbours have just let a contract for a year. So again, in a year's time, it could be a very real option if we're already operating a service in-house. You'll notice in the report, obviously, we've looked at the benefits and the potential sort of weaknesses of all of the options, but the recommendation remains that we do look at an in-house, on-street enforcement service to tackle all the issues we've mentioned, but for an 18-month period to enable us to really test, what can be delivered, what differences do we make, what are the achievements, what outcomes can we deliver. The funding for that period of time also can be achieved through the Council's underspend from last year, and we have support for that to happen. So that sort of concludes the report.
Thank you, Jim. I have Councillor Ring first.
Mr Roberts, you'd expect me to come back on this. I can see you smiling, so we know each other very well. My biggest worry is that you said what my worry was. I read this report and I thought, that sounds pretty good. Definitely a way forward. And why pay someone else to do it if we're quite capable of doing it ourselves? So I was very figgy for that. What I wasn't prepared for was when I heard you said Maidstone Town Centre. Because I never once read this document to make me feel that it was going to be one place again. I seriously, as a councillor, have very big concerns where I keep hearing Maidstone Town Centre. I'm sorry to tell you this, but they cause just as much, whatever you call it, up at Shetway Shops as they do in your Maidstone Town Centre. And I really worry about the things that's in there, in the town, and I'm not being flippant like this. But did we not have a murder the other week? Do we not get stabbings? To me, something isn't right with your town centre, because these things are happening. But I thought this was an environmental problem. So I expect people to be caught putting rubbish out, picking up, dogs pooing everywhere. I expect that. How are just two people then going to do all that job, plus do the environment thing that we wanted? So I'm very disappointed of what I've heard tonight compared to what I read in the document, because I was all for backing, hey, let's give it a go. And I'm still for that, but it really worries me. Sorry.
All I would say from that is certainly, firstly, to alleviate your concerns about it being town centre, this proposal is across the whole borough from a staffing point of view, so there would be everywhere. I think it was one of the advantages of us doing it ourselves and it not be financially driven is the fact that we can put these officers on patrols in villages, in urban centre, in the residential areas, because there's not the drive that they have to get 6 tickets a day. They can go there to really focus on, and if they get 1 or 2, FPNs because that they've witnessed littering, then that's fine. But that's not the reason. With regard to obviously the crossover with antisocial behaviour, my view is that yes, the environmental crime will still be a large chunk of this. I mean, you see 70% of the time will be around littering. I say littering, it might be that it's actually a bag of waste that's left outside a business, or, it might be verging on somebody not having their duty of care and not dealing with their waste appropriately. However, just having that presence, wherever that is, can have some real benefits with regard to the antisocial behaviour and that side of things. And when we talk about antisocial behaviour, we're dealing now with, we issue community protection warnings and community protection notices, which is regarding antisocial behaviour, still often has a relation to waste. And so if it's, managing agents that are not clearing up elements of their land, and so there's, collection of waste, it still causes that antisocial sort of behaviour. So it's very much that the presence, and what we saw from the feedback we've had regarding the marshals, is having officers, and I appreciate it is too, and they're not going to tackle, as you mentioned, murder or, stabbings. That's not it. It's about them having a presence, being there, being able to provide assistance if required. So it's not quite as black and white as we were with the littering that, they're there to just issue tickets. They're there to provide support, provide advice. signpost people in the right direction and be that presence to walk through, you know, the areas where there maybe been people gathering in the past, to show we're out, we will tackle everything from, you know, all the environmental stuff, but we'll be there and will be the eyes and ears out on the street as well that can feed back to the police or can feed back to the other agencies.
Okay, I believe what you're saying, and as long as it's across the borough, I haven't got a problem with that. I tell you what I have got a problem with, though, and I want reassurance on this. Whatever we thought of Kingdom, whatever the officers did, talked, you know, doing that bad thing to the lady that was feeding ducks was a joke. But it will be our own officers that will be put in this position. And I would hate to think, and not everybody's fault, that these people will be thrown to the press because something's happened. So that's all I'm trying to say is we have got to be careful because they will be council officers and they will also need a bit of backing because there's going to be things that go wrong. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And obviously we've got an in-house communications team. So, you know, if we do make a positive decision this evening, I think it'd be very important to get on the front foot with this as a positive service that's being launched and present it as such. So I think it's something to be mindful of, but I think it could be a good opportunity for the council.
Matt, did you want to come in on this?
Just briefly, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have to apologise. I suppose my focus on the town centre was because we have got the Public Spaces Protection Order in the town centre. But as Mrs Shepherd has said, this team could potentially cover the entire borough. I think it's important that actually we are intelligence-led, to quote a policing term, and actually we place this resource where the demand is.
I have Councillor Burt next.
Thank you, Chairman. Similarly to Councillor Ring, when I was reading this report, the thing that I was at odds with in it was actually bringing that antisocial behaviour element into it, and actually hearing you describe the way you see that being implemented. I couldn't help feeling you were describing what I thought the work of a police officer was, and yeah, that. I mean, we've only very recently heard our local police and crime commissioner talking about other agencies picking up the costs of having to deal with mental health within. So, are we going to be cross-charging Kent Police for this service? It just seems to me like, you know, not that we don't want to encourage a healthier, happier, safer borough, but this feels outside of our remit. You know, this feels like the work of Kent Police.
If I could come back on that, I suppose to some extent this is around working in partnership with the police where we can. The antisocial behaviour tools and powers are available to us as well as the police around tackling low-level behaviours. As Mrs Shepherd has already said, the community protection warnings and the community protection notices are available to us, and they are very, very powerful. We can use those powers to tackle a range of behaviours, from waste offences to other matters. We use them quite frequently to deal with noise. We could use them to deal with untidy gardens, but we can also use them to challenge people's behaviour. The crucial element is that they can also include positive requirements. So where we need somebody to engage with a provider for something in a positive way, we can encourage that person through that power to do the same thing. I think there is an element that could be suggested that maybe we are picking up the work of the police, but we've had a joint responsibility with the police to tackle antisocial behaviour in our area that was introduced with the Crime Disorder Act. So I don't think it's unprecedented. I think we've worked in partnership with the police for many years. I think with the current climate, obviously with the police resources being stretched, This is a way for us to, I suppose, deal with things that are affecting us as well as the community, and not necessarily being solely the responsibility of the police to deal with.
I understand where you're coming from, and yes, we do also have that responsibility under the Crime and Disorder Act. But if the justification for it is that the police are stretched, well, as are we as a local authority. And the other very real issue with this, I think, is actually not at all from a funding perspective, because I think people actually get sick and tired of hearing, oh, it's about funding, it's about funding. But actually, if you're asking the equivalent of environmental enforcement officers to go and deal with, a drunk in the early hours of the morning, there's an additional training element and a safety element to that as well. So I think that's one thing. If we are going to include antisocial behaviour in this, there's a totally different level of training and safety and protection involved in that I'd want some reassurances that we're not going to be sending somebody to work one morning expecting to be stopping somebody from dropping litter and actually finding that they're, getting abuse from somebody who's under the influence and putting themselves in danger. That's the other issue here, because the police are trained to do that.
I think it's crucial that we make it clear that we aren't trying to provide a replacement police service. The Kingdom officers themselves were, to some degree, a non-confrontational element, although they obviously did have certain members of the public that were very confrontational. I think the advice and training that was given to them, is not to put themselves at risk, and actually, if it's the cost of a ticket or the risk of the officer being injured, you walk away from the ticket. And that's the same advice that we would be giving now. We would also need to work very closely with the police in the same way that PCSOs do. PCSOs are being asked to go out and engage with various elements of the community. They've got no powers of arrest, the same as our staff would have no powers of arrest. At some point, if we are going to deal with very problematic behaviour, we will need the police's assistance to work with us in doing so. There will come a point where we will need a warranted officer in order to resolve certain situations. But up until that point, there is an awful lot that we can do.
Can I just come on this? Can I just bring this back to remember that, a small part of this is tackling antisocial behaviour and, those wider issues. We've said on here, 70% of the time would be littering, 30% is all of the other, plus fly tipping, duty of care, but it's the fact of we see the benefit of having a presence out there that we are responsible for, not a contractor. Therefore, we can be able to target the areas we think there are, concerns with. If members or if residents contact us to say, there is a spate of behaviours in this area, and it might be, dog fouling, it might be people just throwing their waste out, or it might be, that people are loitering outside shops and then dropping litter, and it's all related, if you see what I mean, that we will be able to target those officers to go there, not necessarily saying you have to get X number of fixed penalty notices, but you need to go and change the behaviour. And on many occasions that will be issuing a fixed penalty notice, but equally other times it might be taking the reasonable approach of, directing somebody to, some other, area, asking them to move on, to go away, that sort of approach. So I think it's just a case of we're not looking at putting staff in danger. We're looking at continuing the work that Kingdom did. And, I want to take that opportunity to say, actually, that really changed behaviours with regard to littering. We just think having that wider remit, that wider presence, being able to think, actually, no, I'm only dealing with litter. I'm not going to look, to my left or to my right and deal with the black bag that's stuck out there, or deal with, there's a congregation there who are leaving bottles around and causing issues. I think it's important that we have a team that can respond to the needs of any community, and we can put them in there with the desire to change behaviour.
Okay. Did you? Okay. Councillor Springett next, please.
Thank you. Basically, I'm in support of it being in-house, and hopefully with proper training, we won't have duck incidents. In my former career, we were always encouraged to think outside the box. So I'm just going to throw something into the pot. It may not be possible. It may not be legally feasible. Our traffic wardens, of which we have quite a lot, are constantly patrolling the town. What are the opportunities for them to just take on, obviously it'd have to be a remuneration, the litter enforcement aspect only? Because this is a great idea, but 2 for the borough. Whereas I don't know how many traffic wardens we have. They go out to different areas on different days. They are eyes, ears, they see what's going on. Would it be feasible to add litter enforcement to their duties? Because suddenly you haven't got a team of 2 doing litter enforcement, you've got a team of however many traffic wardens we have in the borough. I'm not saying give them any of the other aspects. I'm just saying we have a team there that are patrolling all over the place, all over the borough, and I just wondered whether it's feasible to just bring the litter enforcement under their hat as well. Probably be very unpopular, that suggestion, but it's just 2 I think is going to struggle a bit.
We have looked at it. We have considered it. The main difference is obviously that actually, probably contrary to popular belief, parking, whatever they forget their formal title, but the parking wardens, as we may know them, don't actually often confront people. They're putting tickets on cars. It's a very different experience to actually go up to somebody who has just dropped a piece of litter and have that interaction face to face. Most parking wardens actually put a ticket on a vehicle and don't come face to face with a member of the public. Alongside of that is the fact that actually that would be no different to option 3 or 4, whatever it was, which is actually outsourcing it, because obviously our parking wardens are outsourced. So it would only be outsourcing it to a company, and they would therefore be the same principle of, X amount of money for each fixed penalty notice, and then, we'd be in the same situation, basically.
Okay, Councillor Joy.
Thank you. I think the word is trial, and I'm quite happy to go for a trial. Now, I'm going to sound a bit silly here, I think, but if I'm thinking it, I sometimes have to say it. Right, you've been talking about 70% litter, 30%. What I can't get my head round is, and you'll probably answer it straight away, if they're doing 70% of litter, and then they've done their 70%, and then they're doing their 30%, and then while they're out, they actually see litter, are they suddenly the litter officer and not the other one? Or can they double up? And I can't understand how it's quite going to work.
In fairness, that is for the sort of the modelling of the costs and all of that. We know that, we would need them to spend sort of 70% of their working hours based on then 3 tickets a day on the days they were working. However, 3 tickets in 5.5 hours is not a lot of tickets, so there would be a lot of patrolling in that time, and that's the point. In those patrols, they might actually deal with 5, 6, 7 incidents of litter. We're not going to hold that against them, and this is purely that modelling process to say, okay, if we deliver this, and they were regimented and 70% of their time was spent tackling, issuing fixed penalty notices at 3 a day, it would be a cost of just over £11,000 for the council. But bearing in mind, they could achieve more than that. They might be achieving more fly tipping FPNs or duty of care FPNs, which are obviously, a higher value, because whilst they're patrolling and looking for littering, they come across, a shopkeeper who hasn't got a duty of care and it hasn't got a waste contract. So actually, it's far more fluid than that. It's not going to be, today you're on littering and you only do that. However, we need to be balancing it out.
One more question. Who are they reporting to and how often?
They would come under the waste crime team, which is based at our depot. So it would come within waste and street scene.
And sorry, I've got a third. And uniform. Are they going to be dressed like the police with the armour, or are they going to be approachable gentlemen or young ladies?
Our intention is for them to be approachable and for them not to look like the Kingdom officers previously looked. However, I would be looking for them still to have body cameras on, purely because actually it reduced the amount of complaints we had about their interactions, so from that purpose. But no, we're looking at them being far more... Yeah.
I have Councillor Mortimer next.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I must agree with the colleagues on the other side that when I first read this, I'm thinking I must be getting old because this is what policemen used to do. I'm showing my age now, but I'm sure that's what they used to do. But, and in fact, just to let you know, I've got a meeting with the police commissioner at the end of this month, talking sort of like on, because I'm having a lack of, I mean, I know I'm lucky, thank you very much, but because I've got concerns in my ward areas regarding lack of response from the police, etc. So, but essentially I do support this, I support the recommendation. I was going to question why we're going for the 18 months as opposed to the 12, but I sort of understand. I know we've got the money, but yeah, I'll ask that one first, please.
We looked at it and felt actually to give them a chance to really show that they could have an impact. 12 months, you know, by the time you actually set it up, you get them going, you know, we've got to have the recruitment, we've got to have all of that. 12 months is quite a short period of time. 18 months felt actually you'd get probably 12 good months of data out of that and really see the sort of, you know, the impact they've had.
That's fine.
Sorry, Director Karen.
What was I going to say? I think it's good for us to take back control of it. I think we've got the management skills that we can actually deal with it in-house, because I think we've got the knowledge and the information perhaps as well. I think it's worth taking the risk. There is a definite risk element, but I think it will work. And I was going to say we've still got to promote that we have a zero tolerance on litter, antisocial behaviour, and that must run through everything we do.
I have Councillor Springer next.
Thank you. Will they work as a team of two for their safety? Because I think Kingdom went round in twos, if I recall.
Not always. Kingdom on occasions obviously were individuals as well. I would expect them to be in similar areas, but they don't have to be in patrols together. So, for example, if we said they went out to a particular residential area, I'd expect them to be in that area together, so they could sort of support each other. However, them patrolling next to each other is not that productive. So.
Well, I was just thinking on the upholding the public safety thing. That would give them a protection. Just last thing, I know they're not supposed to make a profit, but they must be cost neutral, because if it works, we absolutely need more than two. I'm sort of a little concerned that we're only starting with two, because I'm not quite sure how effective that will be over an 18-month trial period. But I appreciate there's a cost involved. I'd quite like to see it start with 6 or 8 rather than 2.
I think we'd like that as well, but I think to be realistic, start with 2, see how productive they can be, because ultimately, if there is a lot of, you know, sort of issues out there relating to duty care, relating to fly tipping that they can tackle, then yes, it should grow, it should be very successful, and I hope to actually be back here in less than 18 months to say this is, you know, the success we've already had, and can we look at it again, you know, to extend it.
I've got someone else. Councillor Burton.
Thank you. I'll come back in a more positive light now. I do actually fully support the idea of bringing this service in-house. I have my issues still slightly with the antisocial behaviour element, but nonetheless I can understand that if you've got somebody who is, to a certain degree, mandated as an officer of the council to deal with a particular thing and they're standing there watching it, well, we're not really doing our job. So I can understand the argument anyway. That aside, I want to know, because I do think it's a good idea that we don't measure the success of this in terms of the number of fixed penalty notices. I think it drives it in the wrong direction, and although I take the point about cost neutrality, I think if you said to each one of these officers that they've got to, you know, cover the cost of their remuneration in the number of people they pick up, we're going to get ourselves into some very difficult situations at a sort of PR and comms level as well. So what I really want to know is, how are we going to measure the success of this? Because if we're talking about a trial and review period and we've got no financial data point, how are we going to know that this is successful? And then I've got one other quick question after that.
The finances will have to come into it in the sense that ultimately, if they don't issue a single ticket, and this costs us, I think in the report I said, 75,000, then there's an element that it hasn't, because if you're not issuing tickets, you're not changing those behaviours, particularly for littering, we know. However, I think we talked about an indicator earlier about, the percentage of fly tips that resulted in some sort of enforcement action. So there are all sorts of measures we can do around actually where some sort of action has been taken. That doesn't need to be an FPN. It could be a warning. It could be a CPN, a CPW that has been issued that actually is therefore changed, acted to change behaviour. I think also littering levels, something we started prior to Kingdom's contract ending was recording, sort of littering levels in the areas they were working. So I think, we have our NI 195 scores. We'd be expecting to see, improvement on those, or at least, that we may decide we will take, because doing it across the whole borough, and noted we have 2 officers, are they going to see a change across the whole borough? However, there may be specific areas we look around, shopping parades in, residential areas, and do some recording of litter levels there, and has it had that positive impact in that actually there's less litter we're picking up. So there's a number of measures. I think finance still has to be one of those, purely because if it's making a huge, huge loss, it's probably equally not going to be changing any behaviours as well.
Okay, thank you. And the other thing I was going to get around to was actually this length of the trial phase thing, and I can understand the argument for make it reasonably long so we get a good series of data to be able to look at. But in relation to what you said in the initial presentation of the report with regard to partnerships and having to develop that as a bid process, I wonder whether we could actually bring this trial phase in line with your best guess of where we might be at that stage in looking at partnerships, because then when we're evaluating the process, we could potentially have a solution to any issues on the table alongside it.
I think there are all sorts of dates we could look at. I mean, we know one of our neighbouring authorities has just let a year's contract, so you could say, well, actually, it's 12 months from sort of now. The way I would see it is, whilst we've said 18 months, we want to sort of commit to an 18-month period, I would look throughout that where we can see opportunities develop. And I would suggest we sort of bring, a report back, maybe even 6 months after we start this, with this is how it's going, this is the opportunities we see it right now, so you have that opportunity. Whilst we're saying 18 months, we want that to be like a commitment, but ultimately, if circumstances change within that time, I think we want to be able to adapt to that and not miss opportunities because we've said, well, no, we're committed for 18 months. It's the whole part of us being able to do it ourselves. It gives us that flexibility. If another opportunity comes up and we can take on other work, then we should look at that, and we shouldn't be worried that we're doing a trial for 18 months. If something comes up in that time, we need to, consider that.
Councillor Joy.
Thank you. You answered the one thing, because I was going to ask about reporting back so that we know what's going on. Preempting, if it's approved, it sounds as if we're going that way. What's the timescale again of this happening? Because obviously there's interviews and everything else, training. So when are we hoping this will?
I had set a pessimistic date of April, which sounds like a long time away. However, recruitment, it will be driven by recruitment. There's no reason we can't move quicker than that, but we want to get, as has been raised here tonight, we need to get the right officers. We can't just recruit anybody who doesn't have the right skills. So we need to do the recruitment process. It will be up and running by April at the latest, because that gives us enough time. If we can do it sooner, we certainly will. We need to get a few of the back office systems in place. Whilst we already can issue fixed penalty notices, we need to make sure that we're reconciling payments correctly. So we're looking at, only prosecuting those who haven't paid. All of that type of thing takes a few months to sort out. So I would hope New Year to April at the latest.
And they will be where? stationed at?
I think they will be between Maidstone House and the depot. There will be a requirement for them sometimes to be based there, just like our own officers currently spend time at both.
Okay. No more questions, members? Okay, we have a decision to make, and we have a recommendation that a new in-house on-street enforcement team is introduced for an 18-month period to carry out the enforcement of litter, other waste-related crimes, antisocial behaviour and public space protection orders, PCPOs. Is there a proposer for this? Councillor Mortimer. A seconder. Councillor Burton. All in favour? That's unanimous. Okay, thank you members and officers. That concludes tonight's meeting.